The sound of a gunshot echoed through the small, dusty town of Willow Creek, Montana, as Tessa Morgan clutched her 3-month-old daughter to her chest and ran through the back door of her modest cabin. Tears streamed down her face as she heard the heavy footsteps of Jeremiah Blackwood, the cruel debt collector who had been hounding her since her husband's death 6 months ago. The year was 1875, and for a young widow with no family, no money, and a small baby, the frontier was an unforgiving place. "You can't hide forever, Mrs. Morgan," Blackwood's voice boomed through the thin wooden walls. "That debt will be paid one way or another." Tessa's heart pounded in her chest as she slipped into the dense woods behind her property. Baby Emma whimpered against her breast, sensing her mother's fear. Tessa had nothing left to sell. The cabin was mortgaged, the furniture had been taken piece by piece, and now she faced the horrifying reality that Blackwood had threatened to take the child as payment to sell her baby to a wealthy family back east who were looking for a healthy infant to adopt. "I won't let them take you," she whispered to Emma, kissing her soft head as they crouched behind a fallen tree. "I promise." But promises were hard to keep in a world where a woman alone had few rights and even fewer options. 5 miles away, Quentin Hayes guided his horse down the main street of Willow Creek. At 32, he had spent the last decade building the Diamond H Ranch into one of the most prosperous cattle operations in the territory. His tall frame, broad shoulders, and quiet confidence marked him as a man who commanded respect, while the few strands of silver at his temples spoke of the hardships he'd overcome. He had just sold a herd of cattle for a handsome profit and was stopping in town for supplies before heading back to his ranch. As he dismounted in front of the general store, he noticed a commotion down the street. A group of men had gathered outside the sheriff's office, their voices raised in anger. "What's going on, Frank?" Quentin asked the store owner who was sweeping the boardwalk. "That snake Blackwood's at it again," Frank spat. "Says the Morgan widow owes him money from when her husband was alive. Word is he's planning to take her baby as payment and sell it to some rich folks back east." Quentin's jaw tightened. He had never met Mrs. Morgan, but he had heard about her husband's death in a mining accident. The idea of taking a child from its mother over a debt turned his stomach. "Sheriff allowing this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Frank shrugged. "Sheriff Henderson's visiting his sister in Helena, won't be back for a week. Deputy Wilson's green as spring grass. Blackwood's got papers, says it's all legal." Quentin tied his horse to the hitching post and strode toward the sheriff's office. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he couldn't stand by while a child was torn from its mother's arms. Inside the sheriff's office, Jeremiah Blackwood was waving a document in front of a nervous-looking deputy. "The debt is legal, and I'm entitled to collect by any means necessary," Blackwood insisted. "The woman has nothing else of value. I already have buyers lined up for the infant." "But Mr. Blackwood," the young deputy protested weakly. "Surely there's another way." "There is," Quentin said as he pushed through the door, his spurs jingling against the wooden floor. All eyes turned to him. Blackwood's face twisted into a scowl. "This isn't your business, Hayes." "I'm making it my business." Quentin stepped forward, his weathered hand resting casually near the holster on his hip. "How much is the debt?" Blackwood's eyes narrowed. $200, plus interest. "And how much are these Eastern folks paying you for the baby?" A tense silence filled the room. Blackwood finally answered, $500. Quentin reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. The sound of gold coins hitting the desk echoed in the small office as he counted out $800. "Here's $800. That covers the debt with interest and beats your baby selling price by $100. Consider the debt paid." Blackwood stared at the gold, greed battling with anger in his eyes. "The arrangements have already been made. Unmake them," Quentin cut him off. "Unless you'd like to explain to a judge how you're in the business of selling children." The debt collector's face flushed red. "You can't." "I just did," Quentin said, his voice level but with an edge that made even the deputy step back. "Now, where is Mrs. Morgan?" "She ran," one of Blackwood's men volunteered. "Took the baby and headed into the woods behind her cabin." Without another word, Quentin turned and walked out, leaving Blackwood glaring at his back. He mounted his horse and rode hard toward the edge of town where he knew the Morgan cabin stood. Tessa had spent hours hiding in the woods, moving whenever she heard voices or the sound of horses. By nightfall, Emma was crying with hunger, and Tessa was shivering in the cool Montana evening. She had no choice but to risk returning to the cabin for supplies if they were to survive the night. Cautiously, she approached her home from the back, staying in the shadows. The cabin appeared empty, no lantern light visible through the windows. She slipped inside through the back door, quickly gathering a blanket, some food, and Emma's extra clothes. As she was filling a canteen with water, she heard the floorboard creak behind her. Tessa whirled around, clutching Emma protectively, to find a tall, imposing figure filling the doorway. She opened her mouth to scream, but the man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Mrs. Morgan," he said in a deep, calm voice, "I'm not here to harm you. My name is Quentin Hayes." "What do you want?" she demanded, backing away until she hit the wall. "If Blackwood sent you, Blackwood didn't send me," Quentin interrupted. "I've paid your debt in full." "He has no claim on you or your child anymore." Tessa stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Quentin removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair with those distinguished silver streaks at the temples. In the dim light, she could see his eyes were a striking shade of blue. "Because what he was planning to do wasn't right," he said simply. "No child should be taken from their mother over money." Tessa clutched Emma tighter as tears welled in her eyes. I can't repay you, not anytime soon." "I'm not asking for repayment," Quentin said. Then he hesitated. "But I do have a proposition for you." Tessa tensed again, wariness returning to her face. "My sister passed away 2 years ago," Quentin explained. "She left behind 2 young children who are now in my care. My housekeeper helps, but she's getting on in years. I need someone to look after the children, the house." He cleared his throat. "I'm offering you a position at my ranch. You and your daughter would have a safe place to live, meals provided, and I'd pay you a fair wage." "You want me to be your housekeeper?" Tessa asked, trying to make sense of his offer. "A governess for the children, help with the household," Quentin clarified. "It would give you time to get back on your feet, save some money. The ranch is large enough that you'd have your own quarters with your daughter." Tessa studied him, trying to determine if there was some hidden motive behind his kindness, but his gaze was steady and clear. "Why should I trust you?" she asked softly. "You don't have to," he replied. "But tonight, you need a safe place to sleep. Tomorrow, if you want to make other arrangements, I won't stop you. I'll even give you enough money to get to the next town." Emma began to fuss, and Tessa gently bounced her, considering her options. She had no family to turn to, no friends who could take them in without putting themselves at risk from Blackwood. This stranger had already shown more kindness than anyone else had since her husband died. "All right," she finally said, "just for tonight." Quentin nodded and stepped back to give her space. "My horse is outside. Do you have anything else you need to bring?" Tessa looked around the small cabin that had been her home. There was little worth taking a photograph of her husband, a handmade quilt her mother had made, a few pieces of clothing. "Just a few things," she said, gathering the items into a small bundle. 20 minutes later, they were riding away from Willow Creek, Tessa seated behind Quentin on his horse, Emma secured in a sling across her chest. As they left the town behind, Tessa felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. She didn't know what awaited her at the Diamond H Ranch, but for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her and Emma after all. The Diamond H Ranch sprawled across a valley backed by the majestic Rocky Mountains. As they approached in the early morning light, Tessa gasped at the size of the main house, a 2-story structure built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings, a large barn and corrals filled with horses completed the picture of prosperity. "This is all yours?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Quentin nodded. "Built it up from nearly nothing over the last 10 years. My father left me 50 acres and 10 head of cattle. Now we run over 2,000 head on 15,000 acres. It's impressive," Tessa said sincerely. "It's home," Quentin replied simply as he guided his horse toward the house. An older woman emerged onto the porch as they approached, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression curious but not unwelcoming. "This is Mrs. Abernathy," Quentin said as he helped Tessa dismount. "She's been keeping house for me since I built this place. Mrs. Abernathy, this is Mrs. Morgan and her daughter Emma. They'll be staying with us." "It's about time we had some more females around here to balance things out," Mrs. Abernathy said with a nod. "The children will be pleased to have company other than an old woman and their uncle who works from sunup to sundown." "Are the children awake?" Quentin asked, just finishing breakfast. "They'll be starting their lessons soon." Mrs. Abernathy turned to Tessa. "Come in, dear. You look like you could use some hot food and a proper rest." Inside, the house was comfortably furnished but not ostentatious. A large fireplace dominated the main room, with well-worn but quality furniture arranged for conversation. The dining room held a long oak table where two children sat eating breakfast under the supervision of a young ranch hand who looked relieved to see Quentin. "Uncle Quentin," the older child, a girl of about 8 with braided blonde hair, exclaimed as she jumped up from her chair. "Sarah," Quentin greeted her with a warm smile, bending down to receive her hug. The younger child, a boy of perhaps 5, approached more cautiously but with equal enthusiasm. "And Thomas," Quentin said, ruffling the boy's brown hair. "I've brought someone I'd like you to meet. This is Mrs. Morgan and her daughter Emma. They're going to be staying with us for a while." Sarah regarded Tessa with open curiosity. "Are you going to be our new governess? Miss Peterson left because she said we were too wild." Tessa couldn't help but smile. "I might be. Would you like that?" "You know how to read stories." "Miss Peterson didn't do the voices right," Thomas said seriously. "I love reading stories," Tessa assured him, "and I'm very good at voices." The children seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to their breakfast while Mrs. Abernathy showed Tessa to a comfortable room on the second floor with a smaller adjoining room perfect for a nursery. "Rest now," the housekeeper said kindly. "There's a washroom down the hall if you'd like to freshen up. I'll bring you some food shortly." Left alone, Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. The events of the past 24 hours seemed surreal. Yesterday, she had been facing the loss of her child. Today, she was in a beautiful home with the promise of honest work and safety. "What do you think, Emma?" she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "Should we trust this cowboy and his kindness?" Emma made a small sound in her sleep, and Tessa smiled. For now, at least, they would accept the safety offered and see what tomorrow brought. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Tessa settled into life at the Diamond H. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a wealth of information about the ranch, the children, and Quentin himself. "He's a good man," the older woman told Tessa as they prepared dinner one evening. "Works harder than any 3 men. Been raising those children on his own since his sister and her husband died in that influenza outbreak 2 years ago. Never complains, but I know it weighs on him trying to be both mother and father to them while running this ranch." "He seems to care for them very much," Tessa observed, thinking of the way Quentin always made time for the children despite his busy schedule. "That he does. They're the only family he's got left." Mrs. Abernathy paused in her vegetable chopping. "Just like that little one is all you've got." Tessa nodded, glancing at Emma, who was sleeping in a basket nearby. "Yes, she's everything to me." "Well, you're both safe here," Mrs. Abernathy assured her. "Mr. Hayes isn't the type to go back on his word," and indeed, Quentin had been nothing but respectful. He kept a polite distance, checking in each day to ensure Tessa and Emma had everything they needed, but never intruding. He seemed pleased with how quickly Sarah and Thomas had taken to Tessa, the children following her around like eager puppies as she established a routine of lessons in the morning and supervised play in the afternoons. A week after their arrival, Tessa was sitting on the porch with Emma in the early evening, enjoying the cool breeze after a warm day when Quentin joined her. He sat in the chair beside hers, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "The children seem happy," he said after a comfortable silence. "Thomas is actually sitting still for his reading lessons, which is something of a miracle," Tessa smiled. "He's a bright boy. He just needs stories that interest him." "Pirates and adventures work better than the primers Miss Peterson was using," Quentin chuckled. "I'm not surprised." He turned to look at her directly. "Are you and Emma comfortable here?" "Very," Tessa assured him. "Everyone has been so kind." She hesitated, then added, "I've been wondering about repayment, for the debt you settled." Quentin shook his head. "I told you that's not necessary." "It is to me," Tessa insisted. "I don't like being beholden, especially for such a large sum." "Perhaps you could deduct a portion from my wages each month." Quentin studied her for a long moment, admiration in his gaze. "If it's important to you, we can arrange something, but there's no hurry." He paused. "I hope you'll stay on, regardless. The children need stability and they've already grown attached to you." "I'd like to stay," Tessa admitted. "It's good for Emma to be in a real home and I enjoy working with Sarah and Thomas." "Then it's settled," Quentin said with a satisfied nod. He stood, tipping his hat to her. "Good night, Mrs. Morgan." "Good night, Mr. Hayes," she replied, watching as he walked back into the house. Later that night, as Tessa prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about Quentin more than she should. There was something about his quiet strength and unwavering integrity that drew her to him, but she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. Her husband had been dead only 6 months, and she was in no position to be developing feelings for anyone, least of all her employer. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, it was Quentin's blue eyes and gentle smile that followed her into her dreams. The seasons began to change, summer giving way to the golden hues of autumn. Tessa fell into a comfortable routine at the Diamond H, growing more confident in her role with each passing day. She found joy in teaching Sarah and Thomas, watching Emma grow stronger and more alert, and even in the simple domestic tasks she shared with Mrs. Abernathy. Quentin, for his part, seemed pleased with the arrangement. He began to include Tessa in more of the household decisions, valuing her opinion on matters concerning the children's education and welfare. Sometimes in the evenings, after the children were in bed, they would sit together on the porch or by the fire, talking about books they had read or sharing stories from their lives. Tessa learned that Quentin had come west as a young man of 20, determined to build something of his own after the Civil War had left his family's Tennessee farm in ruins. He spoke with pride about the early years of struggle and eventual success, but with real pain about losing his sister Victoria to influenza and taking on the responsibility of raising her children. In turn, Tessa told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a carpenter. She shared how she had met her husband Michael at a church social, married him at 19, and followed him west when he heard about the mining opportunities in Montana. She spoke of his kindness, his dreams, and the devastating accident that had taken his life when she was 7 months pregnant with Emma. "I still miss him," she confessed one evening as they sat by the fire, the October wind howling outside. "But the sharp pain has faded. Now it's more like an ache, a space that can't be filled." Quentin nodded in understanding. "Grief changes with time, but it never completely leaves us. It becomes part of who we are." Their eyes met across the space between their chairs, and Tessa felt a flutter in her chest at the warmth in his gaze. There was a connection growing between them, something deeper than employer and employee, something that both thrilled and frightened her. Before either could speak further, Sarah appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, complaining of a bad dream. The moment passed as Tessa took the little girl back to bed, but the feeling lingered, a quiet acknowledgement that something was shifting between them. 2 weeks later, disaster struck. Thomas fell from a tree he had been climbing and broke his arm. The boy's screams brought everyone running, and Quentin immediately lifted his nephew onto his horse. "I need to get him to the doctor in town," he told Tessa, his face tight with worry. "Mrs. Abernathy is visiting her sister today." "Can you manage here with Sarah and Emma?" "Of course," Tessa assured him. "Go quickly, we'll be fine." Quentin rode off with Thomas, leaving Tessa to comfort a frightened Sarah and explain what had happened. They spent the afternoon baking Thomas's favorite cookies to cheer him when he returned, but as evening fell with no sign of Quentin and the boy, Tessa began to worry. "Shouldn't they be back by now?" Sarah asked as they sat down to a simple dinner. "The doctor might have needed extra time to set Thomas's arm properly," Tessa explained, trying to sound more confident than she felt. I'm sure they'll be back soon. But by the time she had put Sarah to bed and settled Emma for the night, there was still no sign of them. Tessa paced the front room, checking the window every few minutes, straining to hear the sound of approaching horses. Finally, just after midnight, she heard hoofbeats in the yard. She rushed to the door, relief flooding through her as she saw Quentin dismounting, a sleepy Thomas cradled carefully in his arms. "Thank goodness," she breathed as she held the door open for them. "I was so worried." "The doctor was out on a call when we arrived," Quentin explained as he carried Thomas inside. "We had to wait several hours for him to return." He looked down at his nephew. "But this brave young man didn't complain once, did you, Thomas?" The boy shook his head, his eyes heavy with exhaustion and the effects of the medicine the doctor had given him for pain. "The doctor said I was the bravest patient he ever had," he mumbled proudly. "Indeed you were," Tessa agreed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Let's get you to bed now. You need rest to help that arm heal." Together, she and Quentin settled Thomas in his bed, carefully arranging pillows to support his splinted arm. When the boy was finally asleep, they stepped out into the hallway. "Thank you for handling everything here," Quentin said quietly. "It's a comfort knowing you're with the children when I can't be." "I'm glad I could help," Tessa replied. Sarah was worried, but she was very brave too. They stood close in the dim hallway, the silence between them charged with unspoken emotions. Tessa was acutely aware of Quentin's presence, the clean scent of his soap, the warmth radiating from his body. "Tessa," he said softly, using her given name for the first time. But whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by a small cry from Emma's room. Tessa stepped back, the spell broken. "I should check on her," she said, her cheeks flushing. Quentin nodded. "Of course. Good night, Tessa." "Good night, Quentin," she replied, the sound of his name on her lips feeling both strange and right. As she tended to Emma, Tessa couldn't help wondering what Quentin had been about to say. There had been something in his eyes, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. But perhaps it was for the best that they had been interrupted. Her feelings for Quentin were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to act on them or if he truly shared them. The next day brought an unexpected visitor to the Diamond H. Tessa was in the kitchen with Mrs. Abernathy, who had returned from her sister's, when they heard a commotion in the yard. Looking out the window, she saw Jeremiah Blackwood dismounting from his horse, flanked by two rough-looking men. "It's Blackwood," she gasped, instinctively moving toward Emma, who was napping in her basket. "What is he doing here?" Mrs. Abernathy frowned. "Nothing good, I'd wager. Stay inside with the children. I'll fetch Mr. Hayes from the barn." Tessa gathered Emma into her arms and called for Sarah and Thomas to come in from the yard where they had been playing. The children sensed her tension and obeyed immediately, following her into the sitting room at the back of the house. "What's wrong, Tessa?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "Nothing to worry about," Tessa assured her, though her heart was pounding. "We're just going to stay in here for a little while." Through the window, she could see Quentin striding across the yard to meet Blackwood, his posture tense and alert. They were too far away for her to hear their conversation, but Blackwood's aggressive gestures and Quentin's rigid stance told her that the exchange was heated. After what seemed like an eternity, Blackwood and his men mounted their horses and rode away. Quentin watched them go, then turned toward the house. Tessa met him at the door. "What did he want?" she asked, still clutching Emma protectively. Quentin's jaw was tight with anger. "He claims I interfered with a legal transaction. Says he already had a contract with a family back east for Emma, and that by paying your debt directly to him instead of letting him take Emma as payment, I cost him money." He shook his head in disgust. "He's threatening to sue for damages." Tessa felt her blood run cold. "Can he do that?" "He can try," Quentin said grimly, "but I've sent for Judge Parker and Helena. He's an old friend and he'll set Blackwood straight about the legality of selling children to pay debts." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, I won't let him near you or Emma." Tessa looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. "I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door." "You didn't bring it," Quentin corrected her. "Men like Blackwood create their own trouble. Besides," he added with a small smile, "some things are worth fighting for." The warmth in his gaze as he looked at her and Emma made Tessa's heart skip a beat. In that moment, she realized that her feelings for Quentin had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt like coming home after a long journey. Still, she kept her emotions in check. There was too much uncertainty surrounding Blackwood's threats, and she wouldn't burden Quentin with her feelings while he was already taking on so much on her behalf. The next 2 weeks passed in a state of watchful tension. Quentin increased the number of ranch hands keeping guard around the property, and Tessa rarely let Emma out of her sight. Judge Parker arrived from Helena, and after reviewing the situation, assured them that Blackwood had no legal standing for his claims. Selling a child to pay a debt is not recognized under territorial law, the judge explained as they sat in Quentin's study. Blackwood knew that, which is why he was trying to frame it as an adoption with a placement fee, pure hogwash, legally speaking. "So he can't take legal action against us?" Quentin asked. "He can file whatever he wants," Judge Parker said with a dismissive wave, "but it won't get past my bench. I've already sent word to the U.S. Marshal's office about Blackwood's activities. They're looking into whether he's done this before." The judge's assurances eased some of their immediate concerns, but Tessa couldn't shake the feeling that Blackwood wasn't finished with them yet. Her intuition proved correct one stormy night in early November. The children were asleep, and Tessa was in the sitting room mending one of Thomas's shirts when she heard a noise at the window. She looked up, expecting to see a branch blown by the wind, but instead saw a face peering in one of Blackwood's men. Heart racing, she dropped the mending and ran to find Quentin, who was in his study going over the ranch accounts. "There's someone outside," she said breathlessly. One of Blackwood's men. Quentin was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle he kept mounted on the wall. "Where?" "At the sitting room window." "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the door. But before he could reach it, they heard the sound of breaking glass from the front of the house, followed by Sarah's terrified scream. Forgetting caution, Tessa raced toward the children's rooms with Quentin right behind her. They found Sarah standing in the hallway in her nightgown, pointing at her bedroom window which had been smashed. Through the broken glass, they could see a man trying to climb in. "Get the children to my room," Quentin told Tessa, raising his rifle. "Lock the door and don't open it until I come for you." Tessa gathered Sarah in her arms and rushed to Thomas's room, quickly rousing the boy and helping him navigate with his splinted arm. They hurried to Quentin's room where Emma was still sleeping in a cradle. Quentin had moved there earlier that evening for safety. As Tessa locked the door behind them, they heard a gunshot, then shouting and the sound of breaking furniture. Sarah began to cry, and Thomas looked pale with fear. "It's all right," Tessa soothed them, though her own heart was pounding. "Your uncle will protect us. He's very brave and strong." "Are the bad men going to take you and Emma away?" Sarah asked between sobs. "No," Tessa said firmly. "No one is taking us anywhere." The sounds of struggle continued for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, they heard heavy footsteps in the hallway, then a knock at the door. "Tessa, children, it's me," Quentin called. "It's safe now." Tessa unlocked the door to find Quentin standing there, a cut on his cheek but otherwise unharmed. Behind him stood several of the ranch hands, one of them holding a rope tied around the wrists of one of Blackwood's men. "Blackwood," she asked tensely. "Got away," Quentin admitted. "But we captured this one. He'll be going to jail for breaking and entering attempted kidnapping." "He said they were going to take the baby," the captured man blurted out, clearly hoping to save his own skin by providing information. "Blackwood's desperate. He already took money from some rich folks back east, promised them a baby. When Hayes here messed that up, those people demanded their money back. Blackwood doesn't have it." Quentin's expression hardened. "Where is Blackwood now?" The man shook his head. "Don't know for sure. He was heading back to town, said something about one last chance to make things right." Quentin turned to his foreman. "Take him to the sheriff in town. Tell Sheriff Henderson everything that happened here tonight." As the ranch hands led the captive away, Quentin knelt down to reassure the children that the danger was past and they were safe. Once they were calmed and back in their own beds, Thomas sharing Sarah's room for the night since his window was broken. Quentin and Tessa retreated to the kitchen where she insisted on cleaning the cut on his cheek. "It's nothing," he protested, as she gently dabbed at it with a damp cloth. "It could get infected," she countered. "Hold still." He submitted to her ministrations, watching her face as she concentrated on her task. When she finished, his hand came up to catch hers, holding it against his cheek. "I was afraid for you," he said quietly. "When I heard Sarah scream and realized they were in the house." "I was afraid for you too," Tessa admitted, "when I heard the gunshot." Their eyes locked, and the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken emotions. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quentin leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. Tessa's free hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, becoming a declaration of feelings too long denied. When they finally broke apart, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "I've wanted you to," Tessa whispered back. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "I know it hasn't been that long since you lost your husband. I don't want to rush you or dishonor his memory." "Michael would want me to be happy," Tessa said softly, "to find someone who would care for me and Emma." She touched his face gently. "I think he would approve of you." Quentin smiled, but then his expression grew serious again. "Blackwood is still out there. Until he's behind bars, you and Emma aren't completely safe. What do we do? For tonight, we stay alert. Tomorrow, I'm taking you and the children to Helena to stay with Judge Parker until this is settled. His home is well guarded, and Blackwood wouldn't dare show his face there." Tessa nodded, trusting his judgment. "And what will you do?" "Find Blackwood and end this," Quentin said grimly. "One way or another." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Quentin had spent the night in a chair outside the children's rooms, rifle across his lap, while two ranch hands kept watch outside. Tessa had barely slept, checking on Emma frequently and listening for any unusual sounds. They were preparing to leave for Helena when a rider approached the ranch at a gallop. Everyone tensed, but it proved to be Sheriff Henderson himself. "Thought you'd want to know," he said after dismounting. "We found Blackwood." "Where?" Quentin demanded. "Dead," the sheriff replied bluntly. "At the bottom of Cripple Creek Ravine. Looks like his horse lost its footing in the dark, broke his neck in the fall." Tessa felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that the threat was over, a certain sense of justice served, but also a somber acknowledgement of a life ended, however misspent it had been. Quentin's arm came around her shoulders. "It's over," he said quietly. "Yes," she agreed, leaning into his strength. "It's over." With Blackwood's death, the immediate danger passed, but Quentin insisted on taking legal precautions to ensure Emma's safety for the future. Judge Parker helped them file documents officially recognizing Tessa's full maternal rights and invalidating any claims based on her late husband's debts. As winter settled over the Montana territory, the Diamond H Ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. The children thrived under Tessa's care, and Emma grew stronger every day, beginning to sit up on her own and reaching for everything in sight with curious fingers. Christmas approached, bringing with it festive preparations that transformed the ranch house into a haven of warmth and joy. Tessa and Mrs. Abernathy baked cookies and pies, while Quentin and the children brought in a magnificent pine tree that nearly touched the ceiling of the main room. On Christmas Eve, after the children had finally gone to bed, vibrating with excitement for the morning to come, Quentin and Tessa sat together by the fire. Emma was asleep in her cradle nearby, and a comfortable silence enveloped them as they watched the flames dance. "I have something for you," Quentin said, reaching into his pocket. "I wanted to give it to you privately, before tomorrow's excitement." He handed her a small box wrapped in silver paper. Tessa opened it carefully to find a delicate gold locket nestled on a bed of velvet. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of Emma on one side. "The other side is empty," Quentin explained. "I thought perhaps in time we might add another picture." He took her hand in his. "Tessa, these past months have been the happiest I can remember. Having you and Emma here has made this house truly feel like a home again." Tessa's heart began to race as she sensed what was coming. "I know it might seem fast," Quentin continued, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Tessa. I love Emma as if she were my own daughter. I love the family we've begun to create here with Sarah and Thomas. He squeezed her hand gently. Will you marry me? Let me be a father to Emma and build a life together. Tears of happiness filled Tessa's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Quentin, I will marry you. He gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the future they would share. When they finally broke apart, Tessa laid her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I never expected to find love again, she confessed. After Michael died, I thought that part of my life was over. Life has a way of surprising us, Quentin said, stroking her hair. When I rode into town that day and heard what Blackwood was planning, I was just trying to right a wrong. I never imagined I'd find the woman who would complete my life. They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with Judge Parker officiating. Sarah proudly served as Tessa's bridesmaid, while Thomas, his arm finally healed, carried the rings on a small pillow. Mrs. Abernathy held Emma, who watched the proceedings with wide, curious eyes. As they exchanged vows, Tessa looked up at Quentin and saw the future unfolding before them, years of love and laughter, of watching the children grow, of building something lasting together. When he slipped the gold band onto her finger and declared her his wife, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. That night, after the celebrations had ended and the children were asleep, Quentin carried Tessa across the threshold of the master bedroom, now their shared sanctuary. Their coming together as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the deep love that had grown between them. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Quentin pressed a kiss to her forehead. I once heard a wise man say that sometimes the most precious things come to us in unexpected ways, he murmured. I never thought I'd thank Jeremiah Blackwood for anything, but his greed brought you and Emma into my life. Tessa smiled in the darkness. From something terrible came something beautiful. Indeed, Quentin agreed. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret the day I brought you home. Spring came early to Montana that year, as if nature itself was celebrating the new beginning at the Diamond H Ranch. The pastures turned green, wildflowers bloomed on the hillsides, and the cattle grew fat on the abundant grass. In the ranch house, there was another kind of blossoming as the newly formed family settled into their life together. Emma took her first steps in April, tottering determinedly from Tessa's arms to Quentin's outstretched hands as everyone cheered her on. Sarah excelled in her studies, developing a passion for books that Tessa nurtured with trips to Helena for new reading material. Thomas, recovered from his broken arm, followed Quentin everywhere, absorbing lessons about ranching and responsibility that would serve him well in the years to come. And Tessa found herself adapting to her new role as wife, mother, and mistress of a prosperous ranch, with a sense of fulfillment she had never imagined possible, when she was hiding in the woods with her baby just months earlier. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Tessa shared some news with Quentin. I visited Dr. Wilson in town today, she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Quentin turned to her, concern in his eyes. Are you unwell? No, she assured him, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. Quite the opposite, we're going to have a baby. The joy that illuminated his face was a sight she would treasure forever. He gathered her into his arms, kissing her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. A baby, he whispered in awe. Our baby. Emma will have a little brother or sister, Tessa said, and Sarah and Thomas will have another sibling to love. Quentin laughed, the sound rich with happiness. This family just keeps growing in the most wonderful ways. As summer progressed, so did Tessa's pregnancy. The children were delighted with the news, especially Sarah, who had been asking for a baby sister since Emma had arrived. Quentin became even more protective, insisting that Tessa rest more and hiring additional help for the household duties. I'm pregnant, not invalid, she protested one afternoon when he found her helping Mrs. Abernathy with the laundry. Humor me, he replied, gently leading her to a comfortable chair. I just want to take care of you. She couldn't be truly annoyed with him, not when his concern came from such a place of love. And in truth, she enjoyed being cared for after so many months of struggling alone. In December, as the first snows of winter blanketed the ranch in pristine white, Tessa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Michael Quentin Hayes, honoring both the husband she had lost and the one who had saved her and Emma. "He's perfect," Quentin whispered as he held his son for the first time, wonder and love evident in every line of his face. "He is," Tessa agreed, watching them together with her heart full to bursting. Emma, now a sturdy toddler of nearly 2, was fascinated by her baby brother, patting his head gently and declaring him "my baby" to everyone's amusement. Sarah and Thomas took their roles as older siblings seriously, eager to help with the baby and proudly showing him off to visitors. As Christmas approached, bringing with it the first anniversary of Quentin's proposal, Tessa reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of despair when Blackwood had threatened to take Emma, to the heights of joy as she watched their family gather around the Christmas tree, she had experienced the full spectrum of human emotion. On Christmas Eve, after the children were asleep, Quentin found her in the nursery, watching over little Michael as he slumbered in his cradle. Emma was asleep in her own small bed nearby, her chubby hand clutching a rag doll Quentin had given her. "Happy?" he asked softly, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning back against his solid strength. "When I think of where we were a year ago, how much has changed." "For the better," Quentin said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "For the better," she agreed. "You saved us, Quentin, not just from Blackwood, but from a future of uncertainty and fear. You gave Emma and me a home, a family, a place to belong." "You saved me too," he countered. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions of living without really feeling it. You and Emma brought joy back into this house, into my life." He turned her in his arms to face him. "I thank God every day for bringing you to me, even if it was through difficult circumstances." "As do I," Tessa whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. As their lips met, baby Michael stirred in his cradle, making the soft, cooing sounds that always melted Tessa's heart. They broke apart with a smile, moving together to check on their son. Standing there in the soft lamplight, looking down at the miracle they had created together, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. The path had been difficult, fraught with danger and loss, but it had led her home to Quentin, to this family they were building, to a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges the future might hold. In the quiet of that Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and the warmth of family surrounding them, Tessa offered up a silent prayer of gratitude for the cowboy who had paid a debt, saved her child, and in doing so, saved her heart as well. 5 years later, the Diamond H Ranch had nearly doubled in size and prosperity. Quentin's innovative breeding programs and sound business sense had made it one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory, and the Hayes family had grown as well. After Michael, Tessa had given birth to twin girls, Victoria and Elizabeth, now 2 years old, and keeping everyone on their toes with their endless energy and curiosity. Emma, at 7, was a thoughtful, intelligent child who had inherited her mother's love of books and her adoptive father's quiet determination. Though Quentin was not her biological father, the bond between them was unbreakable. He had legally adopted her on her 3rd birthday, though as he often said, "She was mine from the moment I first held her in my arms." Sarah, now 13, was blossoming into a young lady with dreams of attending college back east, something Quentin fully supported and had already begun saving for. Thomas, at 10, was his uncle's shadow, absorbing everything about ranching and already showing a keen mind for the business aspects as well. The family had weathered challenges together, harsh winters, drought, illness, but through it all, the love between Quentin and Tessa had only deepened. They were partners in every sense, facing life's trials and celebrating its joys as one. On a warm summer evening, as they celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary with a special dinner for just the 2 of them on the porch, Quentin presented Tessa with a leather-bound journal. "What's this?" She asked, running her fingers over the soft cover. Open it, he encouraged. Inside, on the first page, he had written, "The story of us from debt to devotion." "I thought you might want to write it all down," Quentin explained. "How we met, how our family came to be. For the children when they're older." Tears sprang to Tessa's eyes. "It's perfect, thank you." "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch and emptied it into her palm, a delicate gold charm in the shape of a baby booty with Emma's birth date engraved on the bottom. "For your locket," he said. "I had it made in Helena last month. I know the locket already has pictures of all the children, but I wanted something special just for Emma, something to commemorate where our story began." Tessa was too moved to speak. She simply leaned across the table and kissed him, trying to convey through that kiss all the love and gratitude that filled her heart. Later that night, as they lay in each other's arms, Tessa thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the desperate young widow hiding in the woods with her baby, to the confident woman she was now, loved, secure, surrounded by family. And Quentin, the honorable man who had seen an injustice and refused to look away, who had paid a debt that wasn't his, and in doing so had found the family he didn't know he was looking for. "What are you thinking about?" Quentin asked, his voice low and intimate in the darkness. "About how sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to the best," she replied. "If Blackwood hadn't threatened to take Emma, you would never have intervened, we would never have met." "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Quentin said, pulling her closer. "Some things are meant to be," Tessa smiled against his chest. "Perhaps you're right, but I'm grateful for how it happened, difficult as it was at the time." "As am I," Quentin agreed. "Every step of the journey brought us here to this life we've built together." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "And I wouldn't change a single moment of it." "Nor would I," Tessa whispered, raising her face for his kiss. Outside their window, the Montana night was alive with stars, each one a witness to the extraordinary love story that had unfolded beneath them, a story that began with a desperate debt and a baby in danger, and became a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the enduring strength of love.